All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's FutureX Discover event. My name is Liz Gassess, and I'm Director of Programs at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of Jim Rooney and the rest of the team at the Chamber, we're thrilled to be working with the Mitex, BEMA, and FutureX communities. For anyone who's joining a FutureX event for the first time, FutureX is a program that unites marketing and media professionals with industry titans in content-rich, knowledge-sharing environments. Our goal is to ensure our community walks away with new intelligence and new connections. Today's event aims to do all of that and more. The upcoming holiday season is expected to be a different one this year. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced companies to adjust and transform their strategies. Our speakers today will talk to us about what this new landscape will look like, including insights from consumer behaviors and intents. Before I introduce today's session, I want to flag that this event is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page in the coming weeks. I want to encourage you all to utilize the chat and Q&A features during today's conversation on the right-hand side of your screen. And please be sure to submit those questions throughout the entire event, and our speakers will do their best to get to as many as they can at the end. So with that, I'm excited to pass the virtual mic to Martin, Senior Sales Manager at InMarket, the sponsor for today's event, who will lead our first presentation. He'll then be joined on screen by Feng Chang, Senior Director of Engagement at Rulala, and John Kagan, Vice President of Search at Cognition Media for a follow-up discussion. Thanks, Martin. Floor is all yours.
Oops, sorry, was on mute. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Lutz, for the introduction. As Lutz mentioned, I'm Martin Heibeck. I am the Senior Sales Director covering the Northeast market here for InMarket. I'm just going to pop open my slide so you could see it. So obviously today, as we mentioned, we'll be covering off on some trends, some insights based on how COVID has affected the environment, and we'll walk through different categories directly related to that, including foot traffic trends, Q4 sentiment by consumers, Black Friday, holiday travel, and holiday shopping. We'll then walk into the 2020 holiday strategies, a very high-level overview, and then we'll re-welcome back John and Fong for the fireside chat. I will say, I find a little humor out of this. I think for the first time in a year, I've put on a collared shirt. So I now feel very different from the last year by living in a t-shirt and a sweatshirt based on the conditions and what it's done for businesses like InMarket. So a little bit about who we are as a provider, as a vendor. We have 10 years of rich experience, so we're over a decade old. We've been a leader in the location advertising space for those 10 plus years. 2019 was a very pivotal year for InMarket. We acquired another location advertising company, Think Near, and were selected as the best mobile marketing platform by Digiday. A few months ago this year, we also recently acquired Ninth Decimal. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ninth Decimal, they now build into what we've previously offered an abundance of incremental, unique data, insights, and attribution. Also with this acquisition, as I mentioned, the data, we have access to over 218 million unique SDK-derived devices. This means we're able to execute against these audiences to not only drive scalable location-based media performance, but also tie it back to attribution using Ninth Decimal's patented LCI foot traffic measurement platform. Here's a little download of what exactly we will be covering as far as content goes. So we'll uncover insights into consumer behaviors based on what people are saying, and this is through the use of real-time surveys, where people go, through our first-party SDK-derived and always-on location data, and also what they buy, using our real-time consumer purchase data. We surveyed consumers at the beginning of the pandemic and towards the end. I shouldn't say end because it's not over yet. We found that consumers are more optimistic about the economy now than they were back in March. A hybrid approach to in-store and online shopping is growing in popularity, especially with the rise of curbside pickup. Online banking was an interesting one. They've increased at the start of the pandemic and stayed consistent throughout. Consumers are minimizing visits to the bank, to these branches, and shifting online with their safety top of mind. We've seen this behavior across other verticals as well, right? We all know that consumers no longer want to go and type in the PIN pad to take out cash and then have to wash their money because of all the germs. Maybe a little bit exaggerating there, but you get the idea. Before Halloween, we published a report on COVID-19's impact on candy sales. Halloween is smaller than the holiday season, obviously, but we want to note that the holiday did not go uncelebrated. Not only did shoppers stock up on candy, but candy purchases increased year over year. The holiday shopping season is on a much larger scale and extends far beyond candy. So a favorable turnout for Halloween is a positive foreshadowing for what could happen this holiday season and what to expect. Some interesting things I've saw out of this slide, as you can see, nostalgic brands like Wonka and Smarties have made a return. Black Friday 2019, we saw a large spike in foot traffic to electronics and department stores on and immediately after Black Friday. Stores were shuttered nationally in Q2, but by Q4, many retailers have reopened with added safety measures and protocols. Wearing the mask is the new norm. The consumer sentiment and general market trend is that everyone is shifting to an omni-channel approach. These are the brands on the right that performed well last year. While visitation behaviors have changed, these are the brands that we saw the most foot traffic, which directly correlates with sales. We also ran a survey in late August of this year to see what consumers were planning for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. The results from this Thanksgiving survey are very similar to what we've seen or what we saw in the summer travel survey that we conducted back in May. Many consumers were either canceling summer vacations or staying within driving distance of their home. Many consumers are modifying their Thanksgiving travel plans this year. As you can see in these charts, an overwhelmingly majority of consumers will be staying local and traveling by car. This is an opportunity for brands to focus on localized marketing efforts given the lack of travel. This year, holiday travelers will be staying close to home, so brands should consider messaging around these different traveling trends, staying local and crashing with family and friends. As you can see, consumers are going to be traveling less than 100 miles from their home, and the desired method or means of traveling will be by car. Gone are the days of airline volume. In our holiday shopping 2020 report, we found that 16% of consumers plan on omni-channel shopping this year, visiting both in-store and online locations. Nearly 3/4 of consumers said that gift cards are the top choice for holiday giving this year, right? It's easy. This is significant. After the holiday season, consumers will likely be stocked up with gift cards to spend. Marketers should look at this extended holiday season as an opportunity to target and influence consumers into Q1 of 2021 and of course beyond. Last year, we saw that big box chain had the highest consumer loyalty, with Walmart leading the charge. In our 2020 Digital First Holiday Solution Guide, we found that consumers were more interested in buying online and picking up at curbside. We also found that 31% of consumers are more inclined to use their favorite shopping apps for holiday purchasing. The takeaway here is twofold. First, online shopping forces either curbside pickup or shipping. Brands must not only plan for these increases in supply chains, but can look for opportunities to run free shipping campaigns or push curbside pickup depending on your customer base. Second, with consumers spending and shopping more online and in-app, there's a larger window to target and advertise consumers during this shopping season via cross-platform advertising. Brands should consider this uptick in online shopping, curbside pickup, and shipping as we enter into the holiday shopping season. We'll get into the shipping as we conclude the presentation and move into the fireside chat. To summarize, there are 4 essential ways that brands can incorporate changing consumer behavior into your holiday game plan. 1 is get ahead of evolving consumer behaviors and trends, leverage actionable insights and intelligence, communicate to your shoppers in real time. And 4, enable fast, convenient, and safe buying while always giving the consumer choice on the way that they purchase or the method. So with that, I'm going to conclude my short presentation there, and I'd like to welcome Fong Chang and John Kagan to the fireside chat.
Hi there.
Hey, John. Hey, Fong. How you guys doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So we'll jump right in here. The first question I have is, towards the beginning of the pandemic, we saw government closures of retail store locations. How did this impact your business? And we'll start with you, Fong.
Absolutely. So as some of you might know, Rulala is a pure play e-commerce site. And so for us, as retail bricks and mortar shut down, there was an overall drop in consumer confidence, right? This was in early March when the pandemic was first starting, and some states had the stay-at-home orders. And so we definitely saw an impact of that in the early months. Since then, consumer confidence has come back up. And so we have seen a rebound in sales, not obviously to our original forecast, but it has been interesting to see that as a pure play e-commerce retailer, that people are continuing to shop, right? And shop online for high-end upscale goods that we sell.
Very interesting. And I'll throw the question over to you, John. What's your take on the impact of business based on all of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we have a lot of our clients have brick and mortar base and an online presence. And what we've seen is now that everyone is more or less locked down, locked in, not wanting to leave or too afraid to leave, we've seen a transition where pure CPG brands that would be sold through your basic retail stores are now turning around saying, look, there is so much inbound traffic on our website now, people wanting to know how to get it online, that we're just going to start shifting and selling direct to the consumer, because we still need to move our inventory, we still need to move our product, and people still need it, and people are willing to just order it online. So we've seen this mass transition of a CPG brand is now becoming e-com sites.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and obviously CPG brands or any brand, obviously sells through Amazon, and knowing now that the consumer behaviors have changed, it's just that much easier to create their own online store and kind of remove the middleman to some degree, right? I don't think anyone's ever gonna totally get rid of the Amazon business, because that creates volume for them where applicable, but very interesting, the shift to direct to consumer. Second question, have you seen a change in consumer shopping behavior over the past 6 months? And I'll start with you, John.
Yeah, so what was at one point a novelty, a nice to have, I'll do once a cyclical purchase kind of scenario, from sports nutrition to even novelty stuff like smoked meat online order that is gifts. We've seen people turn around and say, look, we're having trouble grocery shopping. We're going to turn these novelties and cyclical into regular consumable items for us on a regular cadence. So we're seeing CPG consumption just literally go through the roof and the demand coming in for it. While we're seeing our QSR business, which is kind of lowering a little bit, if not flat, not growing at all, which is a little bit kind of surprising, but we're just seeing that. And at the same other point, given the state of the economy and the high unemployment rate, the higher price point items, higher cost items, not even bothering with travel at this point, we're seeing that demand just decline at an increasing rate, something very similar to that we saw in the recession back in 2007 kind of scenario for us.
Very interesting. And what about you, Fong?
Yeah, definitely. As you know, a multi-category retailer, that really specializes in apparel, luxury goods, there's definitely been a category shift, right? And I'm sure that some of you have experienced that personally, right? People aren't reporting to work, Martin, like you were saying, so workwear, button downs, dresses have been softer, but people really leaning into home, right? And that's both soft home, like bedding, sheets, towels, but also hard home, like I need more things for the kitchen or literally furniture. And while those aren't categories that are necessarily our biggest categories, we see tremendous growth. And so as a retailer, as a merchant, we've started to buy more into those goods to meet the consumer demand, right? Similarly, the kids at home, right, needing more toys, clothes, things of that nature. So definitely a focus on that. And then I would say lastly, for that consumer that is shopping with us, that has that disposable income, she's doing more self-care, right? So beauty, home, personal electronics, things of that nature have also gone up. So it's been really fascinating to see how quickly things have shifted. And then as a merchandiser and as a retailer, being able to shift our buying and our inventory to meet those demands.
Yeah, that's very interesting as well. I think to the end of how consumers are buying in different categories and what they're buying, having more time at home, right? In my case, I'm no longer traveling by air. I'm no longer traveling by car as much. So I'm spending a lot more time at home. And in doing so, I want to make sure that I'm comfortable, right? I mean, if I'm going to be working throughout the day and dodging my children running around through my legs, I want to be comfortable. So super interesting. How has the pandemic shifted online behavior and digital consumption patterns, and how has it led to new opportunities? And John, I'm directing this question to you.
Yeah, the concept of a consumption pattern kind of went out the window, and we saw this most evidently around April, when people didn't want to wait in line stores, people were getting scared. But nice way, not to put a doomsday spin on it, but panic buying. We saw panic buying levels. Perfect example is toilet paper, paper goods. People were just running and consuming it. So it's what we've just seen is a macroeconomic and world-based factor truly showing how we can react to it, and it's most incredibly reflected in how people go and shop. We don't see people trying to search or do online bookings for travel anymore. We see people looking ready to find a roll of toilet paper any which way possible. So it's definitely changed how we think about the online opportunity. It has led to a bunch of pop-up mini businesses, the ones that are hawking literally just toilet paper, or the mask industry, or the mask accessory industry that's now coming out of it. So it's led to unique opportunities one that wouldn't have expected before, but we're at the same point, we're seeing a decline in other opportunities. Apparel is struggling now. So when one goes up, the other one kind of comes down. It's just, can you foresee something like this before?
Yeah, I love the classic toilet paper example. I think that's always a good indication of consumer confidence as you walk into a Stop and Shop and you walk down the paper goods aisle. If there's no more toilet paper, something bad is about to happen or is happening as far as that panic buying or panic stocking up goes. So that's a classic example. What about you, Fong? Is there anything you'd like to add as far as your perspective on any new opportunities that this has created? I know we kind of talked through some of that in the previous questions, but is there anything else you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing like Jonathan was mentioning, like the masks, that's definitely something we bought into. And, the first time we did it, we weren't sure if our customers were going to buy it, and then they bought it in droves. So now we have, increased inventory in that. And it's really fascinating. Everyone, right? All these retailers that may or may not have leaned in, are repurposing things. So that's been really, really interesting. Our sister company, Fanatics, I think was at the beginning of that too, and really was trying to refashion, from a vertically integrated company, also thinking about taking their fabrics and what they have and actually repurposing that. That's been good. I would say also from a digital standpoint, I mean, email and all of our digital channels in terms of engagement with the customer have continued to perform. If anything, we've seen some of those be steady and go up. Or people are checking their phones. It's a little bit different. People are, in front of their screens all the time, right? So some of those consumption patterns have actually changed a little bit, because people are sort of looking at things throughout the day versus before work and after work. So I do think that's been a little bit of the shift in terms of consuming some of the digital media as well.
Great. Yeah. And I like the mask conversation. It seems to be part of wardrobe. in today's day and age. I see, new different patterns arriving in the mail that my wife orders, I think almost on a daily basis. So there is some humor in that as well. Earlier in the pandemic, we saw spikes in consumer shopper activity around key events and holidays as they tried to adapt to the new normal. What types of opportunities or challenges have seasonally played for your businesses during the pandemic? And John, I'll start with you.
I think the first thing we all kind of have to acknowledge now is seasonality went out the window. Where everyone makes this joke that time has no meaning because when you get up and leave for work, you're still at home kind of scenario. And while we all like to sit here and laugh at that, the reality is the concept of time and therefore seasonality just gone kaput. My usual peak season for my healthcare clients ends February 14th. Everyone starts their New Year's resolution. I'm going to take care of myself and then gives up right around Valentine's Day, ironically enough. We saw our second wave of peak season for healthcare start March 7th and never stopped. I have my clients that sell smoked meats. Their peak season is Easter. What they've done in the past 90 days has exceeded their Easter demand for the past 7 years combined. And it hasn't slowed down. We have seen, obviously, no travel. We've seen the summer apparel items, especially from the swimwear, dropped off dramatically because people are just so concerned. The most evident one was our back to school Q3 or late Q3 scenario, back to school for apparel, school books. It was replaced by consumer electronics while everyone was trying to get their kid a laptop and figure out how they're going to pay for childcare. I believe I saw numbers for care.com demand has gone through the roof. So the only true seasonality we have left at this point is holiday shopping, which is likely going to come in and immediately decrease demand, and the new concept of the DIY home furnishing, which would usually, where basically it was your patio furniture, which would start in early March and would be done by August. That now has a 9-month season at this rate. So these are our new ways that we're looking at seasonality. And once again, it's not the goal of trying to be a panic buying. It's starting to say like, hey, some verticals now have no longer have that concept of we're going to peak at one time of the year. It's now going to be how much of the year we're peaking for.
Totally. And Fong, I'll give you the opportunity to add anything, and then I think there's a few audience questions that we could jump to after that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we do on Rulala with our roots in the flash sale, the storytelling, is that not only are we featuring brands, right, like a Burberry or a Theory or whatever it is, but we also storytell, and we've had to adjust those storytelling. So we'll be, telling stories like this is your at home, the comfy edit, comfy chic, right? Whereas before maybe there was like, wedding destinations, or for when you're traveling, right? This is what you need when you go to Florida, or you're going to Greece, or things like that. So obviously some of those curations and stories that we would tell the customer in terms of being inspired for her wardrobe and inspiration, that's had to change very much. So, from that seasonality or just thinking about the types of stories that we've had to tell, we've definitely had to adapt.
Yeah, I think despite the feels of the seasons, consumer behavior is definitely, there really isn't seasonality. It's kind of acting on a dime here now, or pivot really quickly. So very interesting. So we'll take a few questions here from the audience. The first one, are you finding that brands are investing in their own internal research to power these decisions like never before, or has that always existed to drive strategy? And Fong, I see you shaking your head, so I'll push that over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. We always value our member insights, right? Customer surveys, focus groups, things like that. It's definitely something we've leaned into. We've explicitly asked questions about how are you feeling, with COVID, so that we can get that sentiment. And it is something that we're continuing to track over time. So whether that's a quarterly or a regular survey, we want to see how that sentiment is changing, thinking about like, are your habits spending more, the same, less, things of that nature. So it's definitely something we have our pulse on. And I know when we want to talk a little bit more about holiday, we definitely wanted to understand like, hey, this year, right, with the change in likely travel plans and large gatherings and social gatherings, work gatherings, how are people thinking about gifts and holiday in that as well? So definitely getting some firsthand, some first party information, and thinking about using that to support the intuitions that we have, and then constantly just testing, right? And I'm sure Jonathan can speak to this too, like learning and testing what's working, what people are responding to in terms of what they say they're going to do, and then obviously what they actually end up doing.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because you can take what you can from the data that's there and readily available, but I like the idea of surveying to get that real-time answer of a a select few or thousands, however the big the sample size is of their inputs on what they're feeling and what their preferences are, and how they plan to make decisions moving forward, knowing that there's a lot of unknown out there, right? So what about you, John?
So normally on a brand, I'll do 1 to 2 consumer surveys a year, same way Thong's doing it. I have one client, I've done 11 of them in the past 6 months. The big thing is, so as an agency, we have a data science team that's in charge of this research. So we have always had it, and it's always been something. What we're seeing now is the demand for it has gone through the roof. The problem is it's at the same point as cost money to run one of these operations for that, and clients are trying to get as much learnings as they can, but can't afford to do the learning. So it's a pretty vicious cycle that we're seeing on. But the demand for it has just gone through the roof, and we're seeing a bigger usage now of the publicly available ones through some of the industry trade magazines like eMarketer and one of those, and heavier reliance on those, which is not a bad thing to do, but it's not customized for your brand itself.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is tailoring what you're doing for your clients or what you're doing for your brand, Phong, is really, the key here, right? I think we can, again, as I mentioned earlier, we can look at all of this syndicated data and make, some sort of decisions, but again, because of this dynamic change in the environment, I just love the surveys and the first party stuff. All right, we'll move to a second question here. With retailers closing stores nationwide, how do you envision the impact this may have on the upcoming holiday spend? Will consumers go online? And I'll start with you, John, if you want to share anything from your perspective on that question.
Yeah, and not to sound condescending, but right now I struggle to find people that are willing to go in store to things. Everyone wants to support the local business. That's why there's Small Business Saturdays created by Amex about a decade ago. I worked on their original program for that, and it was a great concept, and now it's flourished, and that's never become more important than it is today. So we're seeing this massive push for the buy local, buy purchase. The problem is, while we're seeing a lot of brands move to the online functionality, you see every restaurant in the sun is producing their own mobile app right now. You still struggle to get all the mom and pop stores. So people will still go in, but I don't believe that the brick and mortar foot traffic is going to be what we've seen in years past, because the concept reality is it's still fearful. People are scared to still go in person. Yes, you're going to see heavier reliance or heavier push towards the local mom and pop operations, but the fact of the matter is it's going to last for maybe a week. And then we're right back to going back to Amazon, Walmart, online, anything that'll get us that fast delivery service.
Yeah, I think convenience has been top of mind here, knowing that all of this has happened and we've retrained our brains to figure out other methods of purchasing. As I mentioned earlier, giving the consumer choice is always a smart move, and the desired means of getting to that product or service. I will say, from an in-market perspective, since we do have that real-time proxy on all of those devices, while we've seen a decline in foot traffic, if we're looking at it versus year ago, right? That's kind of the logical assumption or logical data that's there portraying it. People are still going to brick and mortar in the case of a CPG. They're still going to Walmart. They're still going to Whole Foods. I'm just speaking on my own behalf. I do a lot of the shopping for my house, and I love going to Whole Foods and walking down the aisles and looking at the actual products. And obviously I know what I'm going to get, but I always like to see what's available. And obviously when you're buying meat, that's something that you can't, sure, you could get it frozen, but you and I'm talking fresh meat, you can certainly, I prefer being in store and talking to the meat counter and whatnot, but yeah, it's all very interesting. And what about you, Phong?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so again, what's been really interesting is thinking about the competition, right? So it's less so about, our core customer, right? But thinking about those bricks and mortars that are leaning in to their digital. So thinking about just, our external advertising, right? The competition, the ad rates. It's also an election year that we are all aware of, right? So really thinking about what is the competition out there. We've definitely seen and we've heard, from for example, some of our affiliates, right, that there's a lot more competition. People are buying out, shifting their dollars that they might have had for in-store promotions or anything like that, and shifting them to digital spend, and increasing ad rates, or just real estate, right, in terms of what we want to do. And so I think that's a real thing in terms of how the bricks and mortars are shifting their strategies and how it impacts all of us, right, because it's increasing the competition for eyeballs. And then, as I'm sure you've all noticed too, just from like an email perspective, everyone's up their frequency. We're also in holiday, so there's that, but just like the communications channels. One thing that's emerging now is like SMS, right? And how many retailers have asked you to sign up for text, and there's just this barrage of additional opportunities to get in touch with you now that you're not getting necessarily that in-store experience. I think the communications channels of how to engage with customers and stay informed and stay in tune have also been amplified.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The new means of communication. And Fong, I have one question specifically for you. How have supply chains affected your ability to shift the categories of goods you're selling?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Jonathan was saying, everyone's shipping, right? FedEx, UPS, it's been in the news. We all remember at the beginning when Amazon was having delivery issues, and we think that they were, sort of like the epitome of that. So there's only so much, right? The distribution centers, USPS, everyone like that. So in thinking about that, one of the great things that we want to lean into, especially during holidays, is really thinking about shipping windows. We've seen consumers and across the board retailers, right? Everyone's shifting holiday earlier and earlier, and just thinking about, if I want to get gifts in time, if I'm not bringing them to my friends, but I actually want to ship them directly there, right? I think people are doing the calculus on that and thinking about, when do I want to shop in order to account for those shipping windows. Similarly, from just a pure operations standpoint, we're staying really close on that, right? FedEx's system is right now at capacity. And so like we were talking about with the holiday spikes and holiday shopping, is that going to be a little bit weaker? Is that just going to be more spread out? Right. And some of it because we have to, because those like, 5-10x sales or whatever you were seeing on those critical days for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, are probably going to be really different and a lot more spread out. And also, I think for some people, they won't be able to fulfill that demand. And so I think that's having a real implication on thinking about not only the supply chain, but certainly the delivery and ultimate customer experience in terms of delivery and what that expectation should be.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The expectation piece of it, right? I think as consumers during normal times, if we're looking back last year, you order something online, it comes within a week max, a couple days. Now, going into the holiday season and trying to buy gifts for family members and friends, we've never had to think about shipping like we should now today as a consumer. Never mind what you're facing on the brand side and just fulfilling what's coming in. So very interesting times. Okay, well, let's move back to some of the other questions. We'll move into the holiday shopping category, and we'll start with you, John. What do you think holiday shopping this year will look like? I think we've talked about this, but more curbside pickup versus brick and mortar, more e-com. Is that an accurate assumption from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the e-com function is going without a doubt. What I do believe we're going to see a massive influx of, and this is fun for anyone who likes to go out Black Friday shopping in person and fight with hordes of people and stay in a parking lot at 4:30 in the morning. Good news, that miserable traffic-based experience will still be there, but no one's going to be getting out of their car. I expect to see for the big box stores, the curbside pickup, which everyone loves so much. We'll still be in heavy usage and demand, especially because when inventory gets low from the online shipping standpoint, and everyone is so worried about that. The big thing I'm seeing about when it comes to the holiday shopping, not so much is how they're doing, because it's almost all going to be online. Let's call it what it is. It's that it's not happening when you think it is. It's no longer everyone's going to be spending their money on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. I have talked to some of our friends who completed their holiday shopping 2 weeks ago because they were so afraid about delivery backlogs. And it's a real thing. God knows I have stuff on Amazon that's backdated 5-6 weeks right now. So we still believe that holiday shopping is there. We just don't believe it's going to be in that normal 3 to 4 week period you see starting at Thanksgiving. We believe we're already in it, and it's going to be 7 to 8 weeks, but it started last month, and it's going to be going up until mid-December. And then it's only thing that's going to really be happening in person is that last minute stuff, probably in the final week going up into mid-December. And that's when you're just going to get the crowds for the curbside pickup because people don't want to go inside, at least not in the Northeast where I am.
Totally. And what about you, Fong?
Yeah, no, exact same trends. I mean, I think from the early shopping, like props to your friends have finished all of their holiday shopping. We probably saw some of our customers do that as well. You know, so from starting our holiday theme starting in October, we were alongside some of the earlier folks. We saw some people start even before that. We definitely blew past Halloween and Thanksgiving, right? All those holidays. I think that, you know, people have just, a secondary thought, right? So it's been red and green or you know, sparkle for a little while, couple weeks now. And I think from a real time perspective, we're seeing those sales, like the customers responding when we tell the stories about gifts, gift shops, gifts inspired. She's shopping those events, she's responding to those stories. And so we want to do more of that. We have seen other retailers and similarly on us literally starting calling like this is your pre-Black Friday sale or Black Friday starts now. So literally not just holiday, but actually using those words and that terminology to the customer starting probably 2 weeks ago. Right. And so we saw that across a number of competitors and peers, and we've done that ourselves too. So it's really, really top of mind for people. And I think that to your point, like with the shipping delays, but also just like, I think people are looking for something to do, and it's sort of something fun and exciting and maybe a little inspiring to think about, you know, with the current climate as well.
Yeah. And what about the value piece of it? Knowing that consumers, you know, some are laid off, some haven't been at work. You know, maybe the household income isn't what it once was. What are you seeing on your end? Are we seeing, you know, a lot of consumers shopping for more on sale items, or are they just kind of, you know, putting less in their baskets than they once were, or is it a combination of both?
Definitely a combination of the two. That was almost immediate. We saw that back in March. So it's the pandemic, the COVID, obviously the economic and employment implications of that. And I think it's a little shift in consumer behaviors. People are, first of all, love to buy things right now. It's sort of a little bit of joy, right? Instant gratification. But then also, you know, so I think that's playing into it. Because we've seen in our data, it's not that necessarily people are buying like less items, but they're buying cheaper items, right? And at higher discounts. So we've had to think about our margins, the actual price of things, right, to meet that type of demand. So that's been pretty evident in just like the raw black and white numbers sides of things. And it's definitely, she's responding to promotionality. So I think that's the other thing, you know, the free shipping, like we were saying, like we want to make sure that it's accessible. We want to think about the discounts, like what are the % offs? And whether she has disposable income, you know, or not, I think that those are the types of things that are really that she's responding to and that are really resounding right now.
Interesting. And what about you, John? Any shifting in consumers shopping for deals on your end? I know you have a broad client roster, you know, crossing QSR and obviously, you know, DTC, CPG. What are you seeing on your end?
So we're trying to figure out if it's we've seen it from the consumer's behavioral change. And so we've now kind of pushed along with how we're marketing. Usually Q4, we're pushing higher price point items, higher shopping carts, higher luxury goods, because this is the time of the year when people are buying it. And now that we know that people's wallets are hurting and there's just not as much confidence for the buying cycle because no one knows if their job will be there tomorrow, we've started pushing mid to low price point items because that's what we're seeing on the uptick. The stocking stuffer view versus basically I'm getting you the toy car rather than the real car kind of concept. And because of that, we started shifting on which products we had to push. Our biggest thing that we've run into is just about all of our, not all of it, but all of our visual display video assets for advertising. We've had to recut it. Our biggest thing that we're trying to prepare for is to make sure we're being sensitive to the conditions. Can't do anything like, can't say a fire sale. God knows, because if I run that in California, it's not sensitive anymore. Can't show pictures of people hugging or high-fiving. We have to reconsider whether or not we even want to have a picture of a family around a Thanksgiving table. So our biggest thing that we're trying to prepare, besides what products we're pushing and how we push them, is making sure that our assets that we paid for back in January and built in February are still relative today. And if not, how do we get them updated in time? I personally don't handle the TV side of the business, thank goodness, because my counterparts that have been using the same TV commercials for 12 months or had been using them for a year and expect to get 3 years out of them are like, we have to get rid of everything. And if you can cancel the TV in enough time, I know April was a mad dash to try and cut your TV placements. It's a lot of rethinking our creative is our biggest challenge what we're doing. And that's then followed by how we're pushing the media itself.
Yeah, and I think that alludes to maybe the increase in consumption of video. People are home, they're spending more time at home. Again, not as much travel to their home, to their office. Their home is their office if they're able to work remotely. But I'd imagine the consumption of video is up. Tutorials on the beauty side and anything else that you're doing with your clients. People have more time when they're in their homes. I'm not speaking on myself, but the general average consumer, I would imagine, has more time. I guess from another strategy perspective, Fong, is there anything that you're employing from the Rue La La side, as we're moving into Q4 that's indifferent from the strategies that you were thinking about this time last year?
Yeah, right now it's all about creating consumer confidence. So whether that's the confidence around shipping that we've already talked about, confidence that we're going to get it there on time, right? That you can return things, that you can gift with us, right? What are all those things to really think about? What are the thoughts or concerns that might be going through her mind, are important ones for us. I think two other things that we're leaning into, one of which you spoke to earlier in terms of the surveys, and we saw this too, is people wanting gift cards, right? Thinking about what are those digital aspects. We sell some like vouchers, like coupons or like experiences. So how do I buy you a subscription box or buy you, a box of wine, right? So thinking about some of those types of giftables is also on our radar. That used to be only reserved for when, shipping cutoffs were met, but really thinking about those throughout the holiday gifting experience, right? So there's like virtual gifts that you might give to people to get around the shipping. I think the other thing that's come up, similar to SMS, like we were talking about, we've seen pop up and we just launched is installment pay, right? So I'm sure you guys have all seen it, but the Affirms, Afterpay, Klarnas of the world, those are popping up everywhere. And I think that, we are part of that. And I think that is something that is really making a dent in terms of consumers or certain tranches of consumers and how they're thinking about that. So really being thoughtful around promotions, her wallet, and then creating that confidence for her to reliably buy with us.
Yeah. And I think, going back to the return conversation, now that people aren't going into a mall, they're not going into a store, to try on clothes, having that flexibility as a retailer, as an e-com retailer, and giving them that ability to return it instead of just charging them each and every time. Or maybe it's giving them the opportunity to select a few things and return the two that you don't like based on the sizes and whatnot. I found that to be very helpful in the case of, the Amazons of the world and whatnot. So certainly interesting. All right, so I guess we'll move into 2021 and beyond. So without knowing what's ahead of us, there's been spikes with COVID across the U.S., right? We've all seen that in the news. How are you preparing for Q1 and beyond? Are there any things that you want to share with the audience that would be insightful from your perspectives? And I'll start with you, Fong.
Absolutely. So I think when we think about 2021, it's much like the second half of this year, which is that things are still very unknown. So the biggest message from us internally as a company is that we need to stay nimble and flexible, and that more change is coming, right? We may have turned a corner on some things, but there's going to be things lurking that we don't know about. So I think that overall mentality and thinking about, we have plans, we need to build in time for us to adjust those plans, to be nimble, to really think through, both from just like a mental standpoint, as well as literally having contingency plans around what is it that we want to do from plans that can shift, and things of that nature. So I think that's like the number one theme. And then something that we touched on earlier is continue to make sure we have a pulse on consumer sentiment, right? As a national and certainly international retailer as well, like we ship internationally. And so really thinking about like how are people feeling, right? Literally, can they travel? Can we ship packages? Are they getting things to where they want, right? Like, so really that implication of thinking about how much longer we're going to be at home, and what does that have to do with the overall shipping confidence that we have. Those are some of the bigger macro questions that we also want to ask ourselves around consumer confidence and just overall power to spend.
Yeah, I think the ability to pivot quickly, if there's one thing we learned through all of this, is that's something that has to be a mandate for all companies, right? Because tomorrow is a new day and we don't know what's going to happen. Scary, but true. And what about you, John? Any input as far as your thoughts for 2021, specifically Q1 or just the first half of the year?
Yeah, I mean, normally we put in at least a 5 to 10% growth in media across the year, and we'll peak it during the seasonalities, especially Q1, because Q1 is always big for self-care, healthcare, personal care, all that stuff. We're having to be a bit more conservative with our budgets. So I can't go in there and say, because quite often it's use it or lose it. So I can't go in and say, I'm going to go in 10%, but I'm only going to spend 4% more. The reality is pandemic and the economy are not going to recover by the end of Q1, probably not even by the end of the year fully. So I have to be more conservative. I also have to think about what media still makes sense versus what doesn't make sense. I don't need to be investing as heavily in billboards on the side of the highway. I don't need to be investing in linear radio that people listen to in their car as much because everyone's working from home. Do I need to over-index though? And one thing we learned from the pandemic is we didn't gain a lot of linear traditional TV viewers. We gained a lot of streaming video and streaming TV users. So now I have to rethink about how I'm investing in it. So I'm thinking, all right, my print is going to go towards my display. I'm going to start reallocating linear television to streaming TV. I'm going to pull my out of home and move it into streaming radio, and then over-index on social because people are spending more and more time on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok past 9 months, and rethink where I allocate it, and then whether or not I need as much as I previously needed as an incrementality for each year.
Yes, very interesting. So let's see if we have any more questions from the crowd. We have a few here. With increased online shopping continuing to grow this holiday season, can you touch on the changes you have seen in regards to search and social budgets? And I'll direct this to you, John, the VP of search over at Cognizant.
Yeah. So what happens is when we started going to the lockdown, we saw this very similar to years past whenever there's a big catastrophic scenario. Budgets end up start getting cut. And what we realize is when companies are desperate to be profitable in this time when everyone is struggling, they start cutting the stuff that is not first click trackable or last click trackable from a sale. So what we started seeing was programmatic display gets cut first, and this is after you start cutting the traditional media. Social, depending on which platform and depending on what your product is, that is next to be cut. So we started seeing a slow decrease in the social media budget. Now, search, which often, depending on your vertical, either went through the roof or was cut off completely. I've dealt with a travel client who cut by 95%. Then I'm looking at CPG brands who've increased 50 to 60%. Because the big difference between search and social, or search and really any other form of digital media, search is a reactive media. So this is someone who's pre-qualifying themselves by saying, I'm in the mindset, I'm ready to make this purchase. So on the search side, we're seeing things go up for most verticals, where everything else we're starting to see the decrease. We're trying, what we best can do is to shift money from one to go to the other, providing the cost efficiencies can cover one off.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it's like the classic example of if you have something wrong and you you have an ache or a pain, you go on Google first, you search, and everyone's a doctor on there, but you're able to find some results really quickly. And I think, now more than ever, people are doing it themselves, right? They're looking to search to start that process. What about you, Fong? Have you seen anything differently from a search and social budget perspective, and where you and your team are investing in those channels?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Jonathan was saying, we focus very heavily on ROI. And I think one of the things that we want to balance when we certainly saw, the initial contraction in the market and the customer's ability to spend, was that we still want to have our near term and long term view, right? We will come out of this one day, and we don't want to be in a place where we don't have that top of funnel. Right. And so while it has shifted some of our immediate decisions in terms of budget and allocation, like Jonathan was saying, like shifting some of those budgets towards the ones that are near term high ROI, we still want to keep those budgets that are more like top of funnel, right? Getting people to sign up and be aware of us and sign up and eventually buy. We understand that there is a long term play here. So I would say that there has been some shift, but as a strategy, we don't want to just turn off the spigot. We don't want to be so reactionary that we lose sight of the bigger picture and our ability to thrive in the long run. That being said, there is a lot of competition. So as we think about this, and I mentioned earlier the election year, which definitely has an impact on the social media, I'm sure, Jonathan, right? But just, thinking about some of those CPMs, it's just getting a little expensive and a little crowded and maybe a little irrelevant, right? But we've seen it swing both ways, right? Like, do you want to be in the market when everyone's talking about certain types of topics, or do you want to shy away from them, right? So there's been more of a strategic and like brand decision too on like what are the things we want to lean into versus stay away from. But overall, I think, if someone's high intent, whether it's high intent for a pair of shoes or a new pot or toilet paper, like you were saying, like, we shouldn't shy away from that, right? We want to meet her and meet the demand where it is, but make sure that we balance that with some of our more top of funnel or long-term plays.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned you can't totally discard, what you're doing regardless of the situation. Looking at, still staying on the toilet paper conversation, Procter and Gamble, despite all of the out of stocks in store, continued to push their efforts on advertising, just because they didn't want to lose those consumers, right? They didn't want to abandon them, have that consumer become more comfortable with maybe a private label or a competitor that's out there during that time frame and has that supply chain to support. So that's a very interesting point. I think having to support that always on approach to some degree will continue to exist. So very interesting. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So let's see what we have. How do you think the share of voice plays a factor in a brand or retailer's success during a downturn or pandemic like we are in today? And I'll start with you, Fong.
Yeah. So I guess we touched a little bit on this previously, but definitely, right, like we want that balance of the long term. So the share voice is important. I think if anything, we've seen more crowded marketplace, right? Like we were saying with some of the bricks and mortar shifting their budgets and thereby their share of voice online to be prominent. And then literally, like we were saying with email inboxes, especially during holiday, where you want share voice in your Gmail or, Yahoo or wherever you are, right? So that's really important to us, right? Especially during holidays, staying top of mind, staying present, staying with you across a number of different communication channels is still important. I think it's just telling the right story. I don't think you want to shy away from frequency per se because of the downturn, but I think you have to be really sharp and sophisticated on what is it that you want to appeal to her. Is it the promotion? Is it being more, current, right? If it matches your brand strategy, actually commenting or, alluding to certain types of themes that are happening or news in the world, so I think it's about being relevant and being at the right place versus actually decreasing or potentially increasing your share of voice.
Yeah, I think being sensitive in whatever means possible is always a leg up on others who are just out there with generic messaging, but very valid. John, what about you? Any comments on share of voice as it pertains across any of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, the share of voice has now become more important, providing you're doing it right. I will pull my hair out if I see one more brand email me and tell me they're thinking of me and with me in these unprecedented times. But at the same point, everyone is fighting for it because everyone's pulling the traditional to go into the digital side. So everyone is trying to, so it's now becoming harder and harder and harder to get that share of voice, but it's now more and more important because everyone's battling for the same ground. Is it the most important thing? 50-50 shot. Is it more important than it ever has before? Absolutely. But you also have to sit there and try and put a price point on, am I going to make, if I'm going to invest more to garner more share of voice when everyone's trying to do it, will I be able to make up for it in the long run from a revenue and an ROI perspective?
Yeah, it's a very crowded marketplace, and you don't want to be at the bottom of the list if you're spending a good amount of money on trying to get at the top of the list. So that's
exactly
very important. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Thanks, John. Thanks, Fong. It's been a pleasure walking through these questions, and I'm going to hand it back to you, Lutz. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know this information was incredibly helpful to everybody, and if we could go on longer than an hour, we definitely would. But with that, thank you, Martin, Fung, and John for joining us today, and an extra thank you to the whole team at InMarket for sponsoring today's event and for providing this incredibly helpful data that we had. So before we close, I want to highlight a couple of upcoming programs that might be of interest to everyone. Next Friday, November 13th, we're hosting a City Awake event focused on handling and navigating student debt during this pandemic and beyond. And on November 17th, we'll have our next Women's Network event featuring Elizabeth Lowry, Principal and Director of Interior Architecture at Alkis Manfredi Architects. So you can register for these programs and many more by visiting bostonchamber.com. So once again, thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful weekend.